Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the CP Sessions Called to Love, Called to Hope. We're streaming live every weekday at noon and 7 p.m. Eastern Time here on Facebook. My name is Sam. This is my first year in mission with the Culture Project. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I served this past year on the Toledo team out in Northwestern Ohio. I'm super excited for today's call. I'm really excited for today's call. We're going to be talking today about abortion and why it's a human rights issue, and talking more about how we can look at this issue, we can discuss it, we can learn more about it without it becoming too politicized or dominated by the narratives that too often surround it. I'm joined with my teammate Megan, who also served on Team Toledo with me this past year. And before I'll let her introduce myself, I want to begin by saying that this topic can be tough. It can be super hard to talk about this issue. For most of my life, this was something that I never felt comfortable with talking about or speaking up about. And too often it was because this subject can become political. But I want to encourage everybody, and I want to set the stage right now and encourage this space to be a space to talk about this issue, talk about it beyond the politics, beyond the narratives. And maybe this could even be a starting point for you. You can share this video with family or friends or anybody who maybe just hasn't gotten into this discussion about this issue because it's become so politicized, right? Additionally, I just want to take a moment here, and we want everyone to know that if you've participated in an abortion in any way, shape, or form, that there's still mercy and healing for you, and you are absolutely not alone. And one resource in particular that I just want to take a minute to highlight here is called hopeafterabortion.com. They have really good resources to find that healing and mercy, so that then we can begin to have conversations about this and begin to continue to have dialogue regarding this issue, right? And so today, just to kind of give an overview of what we're going to talk about, we're going to talk about what abortion is, why it's inherently wrong, and then from that, how to have a conversation regarding it, how to be able to have a dialogue regarding these things, and especially how to have a conversation without it turning too political. So I will let my fabulous, wonderful teammate, Megan, go ahead and take us away here and just get us started.
Hey, Sam. Thank you so much for that intro. It is so good to be speaking with you again, and especially on this topic because you're right, it is highly politicized, and it's so great to be able to come together and have a space to speak about this with truth and love. But before we dive in, just a little bit about myself. I am originally from Indiana. I also serve on Team Toledo, and I am really passionate about the pro-life movement. I recently graduated from Purdue in 2019, and there I really was actively involved in their pro-life club, Boilermakers for Life, and just really believe in this cause and believe that we should be empowering moms to choose life for their babies, but also to be creating a world where abortion is just unthinkable. Not only is it illegal, but it's unthinkable. And so as we dive into this, I think probably the best thing for us to do is to really define our terms. And so we understand like what we're talking about. So for the purposes of this conversation, when we're talking about abortion, we're saying abortion is the intentional and direct killing of an innocent preborn human in the womb, excuse me. And this is wrong. Really because of this pro-life syllogism that I was taught many years ago, which is three premises. So the first one is it's wrong to intentionally and directly kill an innocent human being. 2, abortion intentionally and directly kills an innocent human being. And 3, therefore abortion is wrong. And so we're going to be really diving into this now. But if you're just joining us for the first time, welcome. Sam and I are diving into the topic of abortion, and we would love for you guys to just drop comments in questions or whatever it is in the comments. So we're going to be answering those at a later date, so or later on this Facebook Live. So please feel free to drop those comments there. But back to the syllogism, right? So most of the time when we're talking about this issue with people, it's the second premise that people disagree on. Like everyone agrees that it's wrong to intentionally and directly kill innocent human beings. But the majority of the people that we really talk about will say, well, abortion isn't isn't doing that to a preborn person. It's not killing. Abortion doesn't really kill an innocent human being. And so one of the things that I've found really helpful in approaching this conversation is using hypothetical situations to really draw out people's thoughts and ideas without making them feel attacked. And so a lot of times I'll ask people, hypothetically speaking, if the preborn was human, like you and I are human, would you agree that it would be wrong to kill them? And this can be a really helpful clarifying question, because if they say yes, that means that they're one, assuming that the preborn isn't human. And two, if we can persuade them using science that the preborn is in fact a human being, they should be willing to grant preborn humans equal rights. And so it really comes down to, when we're talking about the issue of abortion, there can be so many different things that get brought into this issue. But what we want to do as pro-life advocates is clarify the issue. Because many times we'll hear people talk and they'll say, don't like abortion, don't have one. But the problem is, this really confuses this idea of moral claim versus a preference claim, right? So a preference claim would be, I prefer chocolate ice cream to vanilla ice cream. Now, Sam can be free to disagree with me or to agree with me. We can have a disagreement and say, well, I prefer chocolate. But what we're saying is abortion is a moral claim, right? Another moral claim is it's wrong to beat your wife. We would never come back and say, well, if you don't like beating your wife, don't do it, right? We would say, no, like, it's never okay to beat your wife. I'm not saying I would prefer you not to do this. I'm saying it's morally wrong. And in the same way, when we're talking about abortion, I'm not saying whether I like or dislike abortion. I'm saying abortion is morally wrong. And to paraphrase Greg Kokel, who is a pro-life apologist, he said something along the lines of, if the preborn is a human being, no justification for abortion is necessary, right? But if the preborn is a human being, no justification for abortion is adequate. And Sam was right when he was saying earlier that sometimes the topic can become so polarizing because of politics or personal experiences. But this topic really, at the end of the day, comes down to one simple question: what is the preborn? Right? Because Sam and I believe that we should all have, that women and men should have the right to do what they want with their bodies. But with that being said, my right to bodily autonomy does not extend to harming another person, right? That's where my bodily autonomy ends. And the real reality is that when you have an abortion, whose body are you aborting, right? Do you have 4 arms and 2 heads and 2 separate sets of DNA and potentially, 2 separate blood types? No. It's the child's body that you're aborting. And so this really gets us into this idea that pro-life is pro-science. And I would love, Sam, for you to maybe touch on this. But if you're joining in for the first time, I just want to encourage you to feel free to drop questions and comments, as Sam and I are going to be able to address those at a later date. But Sam, jump in. Pro-life is pro-science.
I'd love to. Yeah. So obviously, right, this conversation can't just be about what is abortion, right? It's beyond just understanding what the procedure is or what the term abortion means, but now I think it's important to take a deeper look at what it means then to be pro-life, right? What it means to stand and uphold the dignity of every single human life, right? And I want to dive into that a little bit by looking at the science of it, because the science of it backs it up completely throughout the course of this discussion, right? Life begins at fertilization, right? I don't just say this, I say this with the backing of a wide-ranging scientific community. French geneticist Dr. Jerome Lejeune wrote, to accept the fact that after fertilization has taken place, a new human being has come into being. That is no longer a matter of taste or of opinion, it is plain experimental evidence, right? And this isn't even just coming from one scientist, this even comes from the mouths of those who advocate for abortion, those who are pro-abortion. Pro-abortion advocates such as David Boone and Peter Singer recognize themselves that life begins at fertilization. Peter Singer says in one of his books, there's no doubt that from the first moments of its existence, an embryo conceived from human sperm and eggs is a human being, right? Now, why do all these scientists, why do all these geneticists, why do all these people say this, right? At this moment of fertilization, you become a distinct, unique human being that has never been seen ever before and never will be seen ever again, right? At this moment of fertilization, you have 23 chromosomes from your father and 23 chromosomes from your mother, and they come together to create your unique set of DNA, and a DNA that is frankly unrepeatable, right? And at fertilization, we can say that this child, this little girl, is fully human. She's whole, she's living, and she's distinct, right? She's whole because everything she needs to be at 5 years old, at 15 years old, and at 50 years old is present at the moment of fertilization, and she just simply needs time to develop, right? She's obviously living because dead things don't grow, right? It's just a basic law of biology, right? She's living because she's continually growing and progressing. She's distinct because she has her own DNA, and she's, in a sense, directing her own development and directing her own growth through that DNA, through those chromosomes, right? And we know she is a human being based on this law of biogenesis. So if you've never heard of the law of biogenesis, it's the idea that when two of the same species reproduce, they'll create the same species, right? So if two cats reproduce, they'll create a cat. If two dogs reproduce, they'll make a dog, right? If two human beings reproduce, they reproduce through humans, right? And they have humans. But when it comes to talking about this little girl in the womb, right, we need to talk about how abortion is inherently ageist, right? Now I know what you're thinking. Sam, what do you mean by ageist? Or what do you mean by ageism, right? Ageism is discrimination based on somebody's different age. It's discriminating somebody who may be older and maybe younger than you, and simply just discriminating them based on that fact alone, right? And abortion inherently is ageist, right? Because we've discussed already how this little girl in the womb is a human, first of all, right? And how she's distinct and living and growing and all these sorts of wonderful things, right? But why do we as a society, why do we as a world believe that that individual has less of a right to life than you or I do, right? Because you're smaller or less developed, or whatever the argument is brought up regarding abortion, typically always revolves around time, right? So when you're having a discussion, when you're having a conversation regarding this, and maybe the science comes up in it, ask clarifying questions. You know, what is the preborn? You know, do you believe in human rights? Is it okay to deny somebody the right to life based on their age, right? Kind of take a step back, look at it from a larger perspective, and then apply that perspective to this topic, right? And you'll start to see some of the differences in opinion there. And I think it even goes a little deeper than just the science behind it. It even goes even more into a philosophical realm when it comes to discussing abortion, when it comes to discussing being pro-life or pro-choice. If the preborn is human, like you and I are human, they should be granted human rights, right? I think we all agree with that. Everybody desires human rights. But I think it's important to bring this up. I think it's really important to talk about this, because when we're defending the right to life of the preborn, we're not asking for them to have more rights than you and I are. We're just asking that they have the exact same amount of rights that you and I are afforded being in this country, being alive right now. And yes, obviously there are differences between myself and a child in the womb right now, but none of them are morally relevant to the dignity that these preborn humans have, right? We're different in our size, we're different in our level of development, our environment, and even our degree of dependency, but that doesn't change our value at all, right? I mean, think of size, for example, right? Am I worth less to somebody because I'm not as big as a football player? No, of course not. Is somebody who is in a better wealth situation more valuable than somebody in a less wealthy situation? Of course not. We all have an inherent value that goes beyond those sorts of things. And yet, when it comes to the discussion of abortion, it becomes much more different, right? We would never agree to kill a born child because her mom was experiencing poverty or any form of suffering, right? We would say, let's work on that. Like, let's address those problems and let's solve them so that we can improve the child and the mother's quality of life. Why do we say this? It's because that child is a human being, right? And we should end the suffering they're facing and not the sufferer, right? And I want to hand it off to Megan, but I also just want to say, if any of you are joining us right now or just hopping on our Facebook Live right now, I really want to encourage you guys to ask questions in the comments below, and just allow us to get the chance to maybe answer some of those questions either in this Facebook Live or hopefully in another one. But Megan, I know you have a couple more thoughts to add in terms of talking about the philosophicals of this issue, and I'd just love for you to dive in a little bit more with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Sam. So kind of going back, I think, to what Sam was talking about with this idea of, I've heard this argument so many times where people will say to me, Megan, would you really make a woman carry a pregnancy that she knows will only make her financial situation worse, that she's living in poverty, and could you be so heartless, right? And so arguments like this, it's like, whoa. First of all, that argument in itself is a logical fallacy, right? Because they're begging the question by assuming that the preborn is not a human being. Because like Sam was saying earlier, if we had a woman who, instead of being pregnant, she had a 2-year-old, and that 2-year-old was causing financial strain, we would never say, would you be so heartless as to not allow this woman to kill her toddler? We would never say that, because we inherently recognize that the dignity of a born person. And so what we're asking for is just an equal respect and dignity of preborn and born life. We're not asking for special treatment for the preborn. We're simply asking that their right to life be granted in the same way that our right to life is granted by our inherent dignity and value. And, because at the end of the day, our value doesn't come from what we can do or how well we can speak or if we can ride a bike or if we've been to college or any of these things. Like, our value at the end of the day comes down to our human nature, right? And the only thing that unites us is our human nature. If you consider your friends, your family, your community members, we're all different ages, we're all different sizes, we're different ethnicities, we're different religions, we have different spiritualities and beliefs. But the only thing that unites all of us as humans is our human nature. And this doesn't just impact abortion. The logical conclusions of abortion does not just impact the 2,500 babies that will be killed today and every other day in the United States legally. The ramifications of abortion actually impact every single one of us listening today and those who aren't listening. And because the reality is, like, those of you who are tuning in, and Sam and I, we have been privileged to have been born into a family that chose not to have an abortion. But being aborted is not a privilege. Your right to life is a basic human right. And that it should never be considered a privilege to be able to say, oh, I survived a generation that has allowed abortion. And this goes deeper, like this affects us all, because it also leads to, when you look at end of life issues, right? When we look at things like euthanasia and physician assisted suicide, where there are countries currently who are forcibly euthanizing people. Now, another term for that is murdering them, right? They're killing people against their will and calling it mercy killing. And this is happening in other countries where physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia are legal. And this comes down to this idea of that, like, our value is based in something else. When we view our value as what you can produce, or how well you can speak, or how intelligent you are, it's not a far stretch to say, if you are less than that, it's okay for you to be killed. If you're not contributing to society, then you're wasting resources. And the reality is, guys, like, this is not a new idea. The idea of, like, trying to deny human rights to humans is not a new problem. It's not a new concept. Using dehumanizing rhetoric is not a new concept. It has appeared in our history in many different shapes and forms, and this is just its latest ugly head, right? Just a couple of examples that come to me off the top of my head are, Nazis referring to those with disabilities as mindless eaters, the Hutus referring to the Tutsis as cockroaches in the Rwandan genocide, and even looking in our own country in the United States with slavery, referring to Africans as property. Right. So this is not a new concept, as today we see preborn boys and girls, instead of being referred to as human beings, being referred to as clumps of cells, parasites, and any other rhetoric that you might hear. This dehumanizing language is intentional, and it's not without ramification, because our language matters. And the reality is, when we look at situations like this, is like, will we stand up against dehumanization, or will we participate in it, right? Because Elie Wiesel was a Holocaust survivor, and he has this really incredible quote that I always come back to. It's this idea of neutrality, right? He says, we must take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. Sometimes we must interfere. And I know it can be so challenging for many of us, because this is a hot topic, and people can become really personal about this. When you're speaking to a person about why abortion is immoral, and you find out the person in front of me has had an abortion, and it changes their perspective. And how do we have those conversations in a way that's loving but speaking truth, right? Love without truth is just cowardice, and but we need that combination. And so, Sam, I would love for maybe if you could just jump into some practicals on how to approach people with love, and how to have these conversations. I think that would be so beneficial to us all.
Of course, yeah. No, I'd love to, right? Because I think, when it comes to these conversations, it can be really easy to just receive from an intellectual standpoint, and just be able to take in, whatever we might be hearing or listening or receiving from something like this. But really the true sign of learning something, anything in particular, but especially when it comes to pro-life apologetics, when it comes to talking at length about human rights issues or violations, it really comes down to the practicals. It comes down to what happens when I come across somebody who disagrees with me, or what happens when I'm home for Thanksgiving, and I have that uncle or aunt of mine, and there's always controversy, right, when they talk, and I don't know how to handle that situation, right? And so I want to take a minute to talk just like more overwhelmingly practicals in terms of how to live out our lives as if this really is a human rights issue, and remembering that this is a human rights issue each and every single day. And the first aspect area that I want to look at in terms of this is looking at it from a political standpoint, right? Now, I know at the beginning of the live, I said that this is really a focus on getting away from the politics of this, right? And there's a reason for that, right? When we're trying to figure out, when we're trying to understand, inform our morals, our values, the things that we stand upon, we need to be able to do those things in a sort of vacuum, for lack of a better term, right? It can be really hard for us to really develop the principles that we're going to live our lives upon if we're always going to be constantly harassed by the noise of the outside world, the noise of politics, the noise of narratives that are thrown at us, right? But as I was saying earlier, introing this section, we need to go from just hearing about these things and learning about these things and how to live them out each and every single day. And that really can begin in just your politics, and specifically voting for pro-life candidates, right? And again, going back to what we were saying earlier, we're not asking for the preborn to have more rights than you or I have. We're asking for them to have the exact same amount of rights that you and I are afforded within this country. In fact, there's a incredibly pro-abortion in an international organization called the United Nations. And the UN has this document called the Declaration of International Human Rights. And within it, they state that there needs to be a recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family. And this comes from an organization that is staunchly pro-abortion and staunchly for giving out birth control and prescribing abortions in countries that they're aiding and helping. And yet, even within one of their most important documents, one of the documents they stand upon, they mention the need for all members of the human family to have fundamental human rights, right? And again, incorporating our values and morals, right? If this is the first time you're tuning in on this live, or this is the first time you're really hearing this video, or trying to become more pro-life or stand upon pro-life values and morals, the first couple times you integrate the politics or anything else into it, it can be messy. It's complicated. People have stories and backgrounds that they come from that more often than not play a role in the values or beliefs they have, right? And I totally understand this, and I totally resonate with this. But I just want to remind you that if nothing else, right, when this conversation happens, when it gets awkward in a situation, or Even for me, like, right, where there are times where I hear that little voice in the back of my head that says, you know what, I can just keep quiet and move on. But when you hear that voice, and when you have that thought, just remember that what we're talking about is a human life, right? We're not talking about some abstract idea, some theoretical concept. No, what we're talking about here is a human life, and whether that human life deserves the right to live and continue its life, or whether that life should be terminated far, far too early, right? And so, and again, like, these conversations don't have to be political as well. And we have some great resources as well of organizations and people and groups that are making resources to talk about abortion, to talk about being pro-life in a way that doesn't even involve politics all that much. There's one group in particular, Rehumanizing International, and they have individuals all over the political spectrum and who come from a wide variety of beliefs and backgrounds, and they're all fighting for the lives of the unborn and trying to create resources that maybe aren't necessarily inherently political, but are still able to continue adding to that conversation. And then another one called Secular Pro-Life, where they don't even involve religion within this conversation and look at it from a secular standpoint, right? So that's my first practical, right? Is to not be afraid of allowing this to become part of your politics and becoming part of your conversations, right? The second part of this, my second practical for y'all, is to just continue to educate yourselves, right? Continue to just take in whatever you can possible in terms of being able to be better equipped to have conversations regarding this. I know when I first came into the Culture Project, one of the things on my resume that didn't necessarily stand out, what I was worried about in the interview, was my pro-life apologetics. It was being able to have conversations and dialogue with other individuals who are pro-abortion or pro-choice. And just from this year alone, from teammates like Megan, from other teammates and brothers and sisters of mine within the Culture Project, I've been able to learn so much, and it only causes me to realize how much more I can continue to learn, right? So I want to encourage you to just continue learning and educating yourselves. There's really great speakers out there, such as Stephanie Gray, such as Scott Klusendorf, and so many others that have talks on YouTube. They have PDF files, they have sidewalk counseling brochures. They have all sorts of resources that you can use to continue to educate yourselves. So that way you not only become better equipped to have these conversations, but you just also feel more comfortable, right? The more you know about these things, the more you know about how to talk about the subject, what goes into an abortion, the more you know about these things, the better off you're gonna feel in terms of just having these conversations, right? And then third and finally, well, not finally, my third practical, I'm jumping the gun there. My third practical is it's funny, when I was writing this one down, it was almost like I was just telling myself this practical. And I kind of hit on it a little earlier, but it's to just go out there and do it, right? I think it can be really easy when we get into that situation where that conversation comes up, and for us to just like freeze or tighten up a little bit, or, you know, the fear overtakes us, right? Just be bold. Just step outside of your comfort zone for a little bit and just go outside of yourself and make that conversation happen, or engage in that discussion or dialogue, right? And I guarantee you that if you step out of that fear, maybe the conversation doesn't go the way you want it to, but you'll feel at least a little bit more comfortable the next time that conversation comes up, right? And another practical is in having these conversations, you know, it can be easy to just forget how to defend the lives of the preborn, to defend the lives in the womb. It can be easy to forget like strategies, right, to have discussions on this. So what I really want to hit on is this one I said earlier of talking about the size, the level of development, the environment, and the degree of dependency of the child, right? Otherwise known as SLED, right? And think of this argument as, we would never kill somebody who was already born that was different in these ways or in these different circumstances, but why do we kill somebody who isn't born yet in those same circumstances, right? You know, another way to call it is called trot out the toddler, right? If we wouldn't kill a child or a baby, you know, in these same circumstances, why would we kill somebody who's preborn, or somebody who hasn't left the womb yet and just needs more time to develop, right? And I know Megan, you were wanting to add. I think you have a couple more practicals. First of all, for everybody watching, Megan is so much more qualified than I am regarding any of this stuff. So listen to her as she dives into a bit more of just the practicals and how to have discussions, and I think specifically how to speak love into these situations while also being able to speak a deeper truth into them.
Oh my gosh, thanks for gassing me up like that, Sam. I would just say, first of all, like, we need men in the pro-life movement. So like, kudos to Sam and for all other men who are taking that initiative to jump into the pro-life movement, because you're not just an add-on. You're not just an accessory to the pro-life movement, right? Like, we need courageous and bold men to be standing right next to courageous and bold women to speak about these issues. And I think just to kind of leave on a last note here, because I'm looking, I don't really see any questions. So if there are questions, very last second, type those out real quick, or we're going to wrap it up. But I would just say, like, when you're engaging in conversations with people, just remember the dignity of the person in front of you. Like, truly think about like how much love and dignity and respect you want the preborn child in the womb to have, and remember that should be equally distributed to the person that you're speaking to. And I'm well aware that this can be challenging, especially sometimes when the person on the receiving end of the conversation is yelling at you or calling you names or having ad hominem attacks. Like, I am 100% there. I've been there, and truthfully, I haven't handled it well every single time. Sometimes I start getting all snippety and righteous, and and I get it. But if you can, like, truly look at the person in front of you with like love and compassion, and be willing to ask them questions and tell stories, and just start probing them to like really understand their worldview, I think that this really changes the game. I even think back on a situation that I had several years ago where I was standing outside talking to people about abortion, and this guy just came by, and he kind of said something very rude to me, and I just smiled and was like, all right, like, have a good day. And I didn't really try to engage with him, and he left. And about 10 minutes later, he came back and he said, I'd like to apologize. I really treated you poorly, and you responded well. And I don't want to be one of those people who treats others like that. And he and I actually had a great conversation about abortion, and plot twist, he changed his mind about abortion as well, which was so cool. But if I had, if he had come up to me and said these rude things, and I had just been, mean back to him and said, well, you think it's okay to, kill babies and blah, 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 and just like snap back, he wouldn't have his interior life wouldn't have been stirred to be like, wow, I did something wrong. My conscience is telling me that nice smiling girl probably didn't deserve to be treated like that. Right. So if we can lead by example in these conversations and encourage people and say, to be known as the people who believe in the dignity of others and believe in life and love, like, I think that is really what it comes down to. I can't stress that enough, of just like, if we can be compassionate and loving towards others in these conversations. I'm not saying in any way, be a doormat, or, don't present your positions. 100% use the tactics that Sam and I have presented, but do it in a compassionate way. Because when that person goes home at night and they're left alone sitting in their bed about the day, they're going to have to wrestle with these questions that you've asked them. And if they can easily dismiss them by saying, oh, well, that person was just a jerk, or that person treated me poorly, that's going to ease their conscience, and they're not going to have to dig into those questions. But if you approach them with love and respect and dignity, and you said to them, hey, like, have you thought about this? Have you considered this? And now they have to wrestle with these questions, and they can't hide behind your demeanor or your rapport with them. Like, that is, that's how we win people to to the side of life of using logic, using science and rationale. You know, so I guess just to wrap things up, I think the last thing that I would just want to leave you with is the words of John Paul II quoting our Lord, right? Be not afraid. Be not afraid. Like you were made to be born during this time. You were made to address this horrendous human rights violation of our time. Everything that you need is inside you, and you just need that boldness and that courage to know that like the Lord is with you, and he appreciates your bold efforts to save children. We have to stick together and learn and educate ourselves and talk about these issues. So yeah, we will leave you with those words, like, be not afraid. Thank you guys, so much for joining in today, and be sure to join us tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern time for Bianca and Randall will be discussing dating. And, just during this time of the Culture Project, just know like the mission lives on. Please consider making a donation at thecultureproject.org/donate. And guys, just truly thank you so much for tuning in and submitting your questions. It was such a gift to be with you all.